Okay, let's open the meeting up to the public session. Welcome everyone who's joining us online. And I'll call the meeting officially to order at 9:10:20. First, again, I'll formally welcome our newest members in person, Gina Ford and Emily and David, sitting at the far end of the table. So it's great to have you here in person. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Are there any comments, revisions, or questions from anyone? No, hearing none. Have a motion to approve and a seconder, please. George and, okay, just a second. Okay, got that, Leon? Yep. Okay, today's agenda. Any conflicts to declare? I think, Eric, you wanted to make a brief comment.
Yes, I just want to identify that our firm is working on the project adjacent to the Parliament slip on Quayside.
Okay, but since this is issues identification, I think more than happy to see you participate in this session, but we'll note that for any future reference. Okay, thank you. So updates from Chris.
So York Street Park is well into construction now. If you passed by coming from the west today, you drove right by it or walked right by it. The pond wall footing was poured, I think, last month. Formwork for the interface is up, and I think we have a short video of the shotcrete process. Watching the speed of that, it's a bit daunting to think about having to go around that entire perimeter and do that.
Right?
Yeah. It's not a small wall.
No.
And that's all sitting on a kind of conventional 4-foot deep footing.
I think so. So what else have we got, Leon?
Yep. Just go back here.
Here's Pat's Pavilion mock-up.
Looks good.
Yeah, it looks great, I think.
Oh,
Want to say anything, Pat?
It's fabulous.
So, yeah, that gets installed just adjacent to the pond. All right, let's go to the next one. And the tree tagging has already been done for the 37 trees. So it's moving along. It's meant to be finished by the end of the summer, I think.
Wow, that's fast.
Yep.
Okay, and I think Shannon's on the line here.
Yes,
This
so
is an
Shannon.
awesome story.
Which, the Portlands?
The-
Oh, the
no,
Seeds.
the
I know, we've gotten a lot of
ethnobotanical.
mileage. So Shannon Baker, who's our director of Parks and Public Realm for Portlands, was interviewed on CBC, and I've asked her to come and just talk about this a
Oh,
little bit
thank you.
today. So
I was yesterday in the CDC.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an amazing
So
story.
good morning, everybody. It was, you might have caught it. It was on Here and Now in the afternoon on Friday afternoon, and then they picked it up again for As It Happens on Monday night. And there was also an article in the National Post on Saturday, and the senior project manager, Natami Stewart, was on CTV. I think it's called Your Morning, whatever the morning show is, yesterday morning. So lots of media attention, and everybody's really excited about this story, which is pretty fantastic. It's just kind of blown us all away. So the story is that last spring, summer, as the construction crews were excavating, they brought an area down to the elevation of the original marsh, so around 7 meters below what was the existing grade. And that area sat, as the sequencing of the works continued, it sat for a couple of months exposed to sunlight, and some water started to pond in the area. And then lo and behold, we found all of these lovely Scirpus acutus, or hardstem bulrush, popping up all over the place. And Elliston has some specialized staff on site, and they were able to recognize um, these plants, and that they were special. And so they resequenced things a little bit to give us a little bit of time so that we could come in and transplant a lot of the plant material. So you can see that work happening here. We were able to transplant about 250 of the plants over to Tommy Thompson Park. So they were taken directly over, and they're in wetlands over there where they'll hopefully flourish. Hoping to collect some seed from those plants and bring them back to the Portland site at some point as well. And we also took about 50 buckets of the soil to a lab at U of T, to the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. And they're working right now on creating the conditions to stimulate more germination in this peat and see what other kinds of species might spring up. And also looking at doing some work with the pollen and dating, because of course, one of the fascinating things about peat is that, it accumulates over many, 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 many years. And so as we got down to the peat layer of the original Ashbridges Marsh, it may be that the peat material, which is also coming to life in the lab, is in fact much, much older than even these seeds that have been sitting there for 100 years. So just an incredible story about the resilience and regenerative nature, the regenerative power of nature, that these seeds can be, sitting dormant for over 100 years in the dark under 7 meters of fill. And then when they get the right conditions, they're still able to pop up and make themselves known. And the fact that we can bring some of these back to the Portland site in the wetlands that we're creating is just an amazing connection to the physical landscape. So we're all pretty excited about it, and excited for the work to continue with our partners at U of T to see what else this material can tell us. And also working with Minokamik, our Indigenous design consultants, again, looking to incorporate their input and make sure that that connection is made as well.
All right, thank you, Shannon.
Crazy.
Wow, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Great story.
Yeah,
Any
unbelievable.
questions? Bet need Marie's back. Well, how far do you
I
need
have a
Marie?
million questions, but I'll.
I'm sure, yeah.
Shannon,
Wow.
I'm just really thrilled that someone was watching, right? And that they noticed that this is a different kind of Scirpus, something we don't see in the area, and that there's a legacy seed bed. I mean, that's just amazing. It also suggests there's so much more to be discovered in this project that we would not have anticipated, that could tell us a lot about the way this has been designed already for such resilience. Has a kind of baked in ethnobotanical component that's just really exciting.
Well, it's
Thanks
made me,
for
it's
keeping
made
it
me
on.
realize too that, our approach to naturalizing the river was to relocate the mouth. But the original channel of the Don was kind of underneath the Gardner, a little bit north of the Gardner, between the rail corridor and the Gardner. And when the Gardner gets rebuilt, we'll probably be uncovering
Yeah.
even more stuff.
Yeah.
And then when that land gets redeveloped even more, so I think we should really try to have a program in place, because we might find even more stuff there, because that is the original riverbed. And I want to make sure we have these people, if not others, and maybe a bit of a plan
Yeah.
before we find the stuff for what we're going
Right.
to do when we find it. Yeah.
This is a great pilot test, really, for that kind of recovery program and a reseeding.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's just a really lovely role for Waterfront Toronto to be able to activate that kind of partnership and the power of recovery.
Fatty, go ahead.
Fatty?
I just wanted to really thank you, Shannon, and Waterfront in general for documenting this process and being very intentional about not just showcasing it, but describing this to the public, because this is really, once in a lifetime learning opportunity and once in a lifetime project. So the process itself being documented and having the foresight to do this is just absolutely incredible. So I just wanted to say thank you for the team for actually taking this on as a real, in progress, in process learning, and the documentation of it is something that's going to be valuable for cities all around the world. So thank you.
It
Yep.
certainly brings meaning to the role of a steward of the landscape.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. It's terrific.
Thank
Any
you.
other matters you want to cover, Chris?
Do we have anything else?
Updates?
Oh, you want to do last
quick.
month's project?
Yeah.
Project?
Quick update on last month's project. It's the Lens Block 13. So this came for their first review issues identification in March. The team, they're on track to submit their first zoning amendment application and site plan application this month. And we expect the team to return for schematic design later this year in the fall or winter. For next month, we have potentially one project on the agenda, 17 Yonge, phase 4 and 5, returning for detailed design. There is a chance that this project might shift over to June, in which case we don't have any project on the agenda. So
Wow.
We've gone from doing 5 a day to,
No kidding.
we've gone from a torrent to a trickle. I'm not sure why, but maybe it's COVID, maybe it's just timing.
Yeah. So I'll let everyone know as soon as possible, whether we will have a meeting or not. I think either way, we would like to meet and vote on the awards, just so that we can continue with the schedule of the awards program. But we'll let everyone know.
Yeah, we may
Just,
just do that virtually
A
then.
reminder, 1 to 7 Young, which project is this one?
1 to 7 Yonge is a Toronto Star building. So this is phase 4 and 5. So it's the southern half of the site. So we're not looking at the corner public space. That's phase 1 to 3. This is specifically on the Toronto Star building, the public realm, and also I think there are two additional towers next to the Toronto Star building on this site.
Yeah, this is Hariri Pontarini.
Yeah. This is the Pinnacle Big Tower?
Yeah,
No, that's on the north.
I think the big tower's already
Under construction.
under construction,
Yeah.
yeah.
That one is, yeah.
Yeah, but it's that same complex.
Same.
Yeah.
Same complex, yeah.
Okay, anything else you have for updates?
I think that's it.
No? Okay, thank you very much. So I think we're pretty well on time. We'll move into the first item of the agenda, which is seeing it for the first time, the Parliament slip here for issues identification only. So there will not be a vote, but it's a great opportunity for all of us to express our initial comments on the Parliament slip, a very exciting project. And I just remind everyone in the public session, this is being recorded and will be posted on the Waterfront Toronto website. So Adam, I believe you're there to give us the introduction.
Yes, that's correct. Leon, do you want me to share the slides from my end, or are you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So we're here today with the Parliament Slip project. My name is Adam Novak. I'm the design project manager for this project with Waterfront Toronto. Waterfront Toronto is also the proponent of this project. And today we're also joined by our design team led by West 8 DTH and their sub-consultants, MJMA, who is the pool architect, Moffett and Nickel, who is the marine engineers, and McKay Line Sweet Apple Architects, who are the concessions architects. And we're here today for the issues identification review. A little bit of background on the project. Waterfront Toronto proposed a plan for activating the Parliament Slip in April 2021. Waterfront Toronto is overseeing the development of the design and construction of this project in collaboration with the City of Toronto, and the total project budget is approximately $75 million. Construction of the lake filling is scheduled to begin in 2023. Public realm components would follow in 2025 to 2028. And in terms of an overview of the project scope, the project consists of 6 main components. First one being our wave deck with the water amphitheater. Second is an accessible kayak and canoe launch. Third is public swimming pools, one large and one smaller leisure pool, combined within a facilities building. We also have a floating pier with concessions and a restaurant, and a floating wetlands with aquatic habitat. And then lastly, a fixed transportation pier for our marine node. A little bit of background of the project timeline. So as I mentioned, construction of the dock walls and lake fillings are scheduled to begin next year in 2023 and be complete in 2026. Construction of the other components would follow after that. So construction of the swimming pool, facilities building are both dependent on the new dock wall, and the marine components such as the transportation pier and the concessions are dependent on the dock wall reinforcement at 333 Lakeshore and at East Bayfront. I also want to provide a little bit of summary of the project consultation that we have completed to date. So we have met with 5 local groups, the BIA, the Quayside Stakeholder Advisories Committee, and MCFN, and we received feedback on the swimming. A lot of the feedback we heard is people are very excited about the idea of outdoor swimming in this location, which is great. We've been advised to ensure the pool has sufficient capacity to meet the anticipated demand, and just general support for outdoor winter swimming. Feedback in terms of the concessions for our commercial and retail space. We've heard that more is needed along the waterfront. People generally love the idea of these kind of smaller mom and pop style concessions. And lastly, considering access requirements for servicing and delivery, as these are located on floating piers. And then lastly, for general kind of water-based activities, we've heard people like the idea of canoe and kayaking along with storage. We need to consider the safety of all users, which means looking at how the motorized and non-motorized boats can live safely in the slip and kind of work harmoniously with each other. And also we need to look at basically the water currents to consider waves and churning within the slip to make sure again that the wave and action is appropriate for the types of uses we're proposing. Next, looking at kind of the existing site context. So you can see here, this purple line is the project boundary. We are extending out into the harbor through several water lots. So the first water lot is this one on the west side, which will be for the transportation pier, which will project out off the dock wall. We also have a water lot, which will be for the floating restaurant, which will also project out past the slip. And then kind of really the heart of the project with the wave deck and swimming pools being located on the northern part of the slip. In terms of a little bit of kind of future context as well. So the Queens Quay East extension and lake filling actually traverses across the northern part of the triangle of the slip. So that creates kind of one of the opportunities for lake filling. So that's one piece. We have Aqua Luna under construction directly on the west side of the slip, with the rest of the East Bayfront community built out further to the west. On the north side, we have quayside blocks 1 through 5 wrapping the site, moving from east to west down along the water. We also have the future Silo Park directly against the slip. And then further out, we have the future 351 Lakeshore Boulevard East project. A little bit of site photos kind of looking at the slip. So this is standing in the future Silo Park, looking towards where the Queens Quay East extension will go. So if you basically kind of draw a line from this part will be for Queens Quay East, and then the actual Parliament slip would start kind of further down in this zone. Looking a little bit further down, so this is standing kind of also in Silo Park, midway down the slip. Basically, great vantage point right toward East Bayfront. You can see T3 under construction. And eventually, once Aqua Luna is finished, basically this whole facade will be Aqua Luna. So we're starting to also kind of think about how does this project and Aqua Luna work together. You can see here is standing also in Silo Park, looking toward the water. This is a photo from World Water Day, which was April 22nd, and we held an Indigenous ceremony on site that day. Next, kind of moving into a little bit of the background of the Central Waterfront Secondary Plan context. So really looking at how this plan designated several slips, including Parliament Slip, as a special place within the Inner Harbor. And then in terms of kind of values assigned to those special places, first one looking at the idea to attract high value tourism to the Central Waterfront in order to strengthen Toronto's role as the capital culture of Canada. Next point being looking at the need to provide a variety of year-round experiences for visitors through new facilities. Next, looking at the idea of providing boating opportunities throughout the city to both draw tourists and residents to the waterfront. And then lastly, looking at the idea of telling the story of the heritage of Toronto's waterfront through the development of new special places. Next, looking at the East Bayfront Precinct Plan. So basically noting how the plan calls for the area south of Queens Quay and the park to be programmed with this idea of recreational space to suit a variety of users or community center use for various programs. So we do have a community center on one side of the site, which I'll touch on a bit later, on the ground floor of Aqua Luna, and we have Silo Park on the east side. So really kind of reinforcing how this site is to create kind of a recreational hub within the waterfront. And then lastly, looking at the Keating Channel Precinct Plan and going back to that idea of calling for the provision of community services, which call for integrating community space into the neighborhood, co-locating services where appropriate. So again, kind of looking at what are the existing and proposed uses on site to locate community services adjacent to both existing and future parks. And then lastly, to ensure that the project is accessible for all. Next, moving into the marine strategy use completed by Waterfront Toronto in 2020. So again, kind of looking at this idea of that we need to accommodate a variety of marine users, both from a transportation standpoint, creating opportunities for both ferries and water taxis to dock and more right at the slip, but then also adding in this idea of recreational users such as kayak and canoe, non-motorized recreation. And then we are also looking at the idea of potentially integrating some electric boat rental for recreational use. So just want to touch a little bit on kind of some of the existing site context. So I think everybody's familiar. This is the Quayside development proponent that was selected recently by Waterfront Toronto. Looking at kind of on the east side of the future Silo Park, this is the 351 Lakeshore Boulevard project, which consists of 3 blocks. One block here, the north block north of Queens Quay, the existing silos, which are located in the central block. So development is proposed on the east side of the silos and above the silos. And then lastly, the south block, which is adjacent to block 5. Also want to touch on Aqualuna, which is located directly on the east side of the slip here. So as you can see on the left-hand side, this is a ground floor plan of Aqualuna, and this area shaded in dark gray is a proposed community center that's located on the ground floor, opening it up to the WEP and the slip, which is a really great PAC program. And you can see here, there's kind of the residential units facing the slip. Lastly, we looked a bit too kind of at harbor pools, both around the world, to kind of understand how this pool may fit within the existing portfolio of outdoor pools around the world. So the first project we looked at was the Iceberg Pool in Sydney, looking at the idea of this is a 2-basin pool, one basin for more active recreation, such as lane swimming, and another one for more leisure-based and recreation for children and families. The next one we looked at was the Kitsilano Pool in Vancouver. This one is the largest outdoor saltwater pool in Canada, and one of the largest that's located directly adjacent to a body of water. Next, we looked at the Gord Edgar Downey Pier in Kingston. This is kind of a newer urban outdoor pool in Canada, and this one is kind of very popular for students, kind of from a recreation standpoint. The next one we looked at is Islands Brig in Copenhagen, designed by JDS and Bjarke Engels Group. This one consists of 5 pools, 2 of which are for children, and then the other 3 are for kind of more active recreation. And this one really kind of became quite iconic. Also, they have a strong mission and kind of about cleaning water as well. The next one we looked at is the Harbor Bass Pool in Aarhus. This one also kind of provides a variety of recreation and leisure swimming, and this one also incorporates kind of a high level of concessions. And then lastly, we looked at the Basin de la Valette in Paris. This is a floating outdoor pool that receives the water from the river and has been a big success as well. In terms of where we are today, so we're here for issues identification, and then I'll just kind of quickly run through the future stages. So our intent is to come back sometime later this summer for our stage 2 schematic design review at the completion of 30%. After that, we would then move into site plan application and come back to the panel again for the 3rd review at the completion of detailed design. And depending how that review goes, we may come back for another 60% and a 90% as required. Lastly, just want to point out a few areas for panel consideration. The first one is looking for feedback on the vision plan and proposed uses for Parliament Slip. Second point being feedback on the swimming pools and potential off-season uses. And then lastly, looking for feedback on the pier concessions and restaurant architecture. And with that, I will turn it over to Shelley Long for the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Adam. Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all in one room again. I'm going to share my screen. Just the wrong one. All right. Can everyone see that? Okay.
That was a very quick presentation.
No questions.
No questions. Now, no doubt you also have a lot of questions because you've seen these images probably floating around on the internet for the last year and been wondering when it will come to DRP. So today, as Adam mentioned, I'm not only presenting on behalf of myself, but on behalf of also Moffett Nickel, our longtime esteemed marine engineering partner, and two architects who we have brought in to join our team to design the swimming pool building. That's MJMA, who you all know well from Toronto, and McKayline Sweet Apple from the East Coast to work on the concessions pavilions on the floating pier. So I'll jump right in. I guess my name's Shelly, for those of you, I think I've met all of you, the design manager for the West State DTH joint venture, and landscape architect by training, but now also working on this fantastic waterfront project. So today I want to start with the context and the design history, which Adam has largely covered. I'll review the design aspects, the vision that we've put together as a team, the opportunities, the design principles, and then walk you through all of the concept design that responds to Waterfront Toronto's agenda. So from a master plan context, Parliament Slip is our easternmost bookend of the silo to silo central primary waterfront, with, as you know, its sisters in the west-hand side, Spadina, Peter, Reese, Simcoe, and Portlands, which we've worked a lot on, and Young and Jarvis, which will be improved as part of the Queens Quay East project. Parliament Slip is really always been thought of as a place that, because it is a bookend, had a really large public realm contribution with a very large wave deck that had stories about cleaning the water and showcasing the cleaning water, and creating active marine uses in and around the water. And so the vision that you see today has been kind of slow cooking within our offices for a very, very long time. It fits very well into the waterfront walk master plan logic that involves the kind of building out of extra public space. That's the wave deck, a connected water's edge promenade on the land side, and the addition of two key pieces of marine infrastructure, piers and bridges, that would allow for the separation of small boats to use the inner piers and larger boats to use the lakeside water. And so we are creating a finer grain of water space, pedestrian space, and public realm. When we think about the Western Central Waterfront, we think about Harbourfront Centre being really the heart of all of this waterfront activity. And we see Parliament Slip and its proximity to the Distillery District and all of these wonderful new developments in the east side as the blue heart of the Central Waterfront, and really a place where we can touch the water and be with the water. It works on two different levels of community. So that's addressing the urban community that lives in and around Parliament Slip and the Central Waterfront, but also reaches out to a much greater community in the GTA and even tourists who are visiting Toronto's waterfront in the summertime. There's also a new cousin to the south of the Central Waterfront, and that's the Portlands. Parliament Slip has a very close proximity to this new lake fill, and which we'll see in a site photo shortly. And it aims to connect and complement as kind of this urban edge that connects and complements to the more organic, let's say naturalized edges that are being today's condition. which largely is empty lots, and then of course Aqualuna building under construction. The water lots are currently being used by a number of mooring, medium-sized boats moored in the slip, and there is no connection to the water's edge in the current site condition. And it will really serve as a kind of bridge, literally, physically, or figuratively, that connects the Portlands with the central waterfront communities. So Adam has walked through a lot of these. Some key relationships I want to talk about from a design perspective that we're thinking about. First of all, the experience walking down from the Distillery District, from the downtown, under the Gardiner, through a Parliament Plaza, which is a big open public space north of Queens Quay, crossing the threshold of Queens Quay Boulevard and arriving at this slip, which is really a connected band of community uses, including the community center in Aqualuna and the future Silo Park on the east side. There's 3 really landmark facades that are fronting onto Parliament Slip. Of course, Aqualuna and her spill out area at the ground floor onto the Water's Edge Promenade, but also the future cultural use building at Block 5, and the iconic Soy Mills silo buildings that will have a direct presence and onto the slip. This is an illustration of the amount of lake fill that's roughly dedicated to the Parliament Slip project and to the Queens Quay East right-of-way project. Our team analyzed at an early stage in our functional study and feasibility study, what is the best way to put swimming on the waterfront. This lake filling that will have to happen for the Queens Quay East LRT project was seen as an opportunity to create a landside swimming pool, actually, to achieve the swimming functions. And we can get into that a bit more into the discussion period. Another opportunity of the project was to create a really active and democratic water's edge. We have a lot of private marinas in the west side of the central waterfront, and the focus here was really to focus on human-powered watercraft, small-scale watercraft learning to get on the water in a boat, and new forms of transportation such as electric boats, boat shares, and public and shared water transportation. Of course, the water taxis are just a really popular usage in the Lake Ontario waterfront, and the possibility for larger public uses such as a water bus or a short haul ferry to be accommodated within the slip. In terms of other places that you can swim on the waterfront, MJMA prepared this analysis of facility classifications and ratings of other pools within Toronto. There are no other pools in downtown Toronto, outdoor pools east of Spadina Avenue. So this would, in context to the outdoor pools in the area. And future indoor pools in the neighborhood include Wang Young Community Center and a future Portlands Community Center. So those 2 pools we see will provide year-round indoor swimming opportunities for these 2 growing communities, and Parliament Slip would complement these with a very different offering that is an outdoor, more leisure-focused pool. There are 2 other waterfront pools you're probably thinking of, Donald D. Somerville and Sunnyside Pool, which are both quite a ways away from Parliament Slip. These are both rating A facilities, which means that they have 25-yard length pools and additional 3 to 4 amenities, which include these on the right-hand side. So that's the context and the opportunities, and I'd like to get into the design principles that have framed the concept design. We're aiming to keep a majority blue footprint. We think it's really important that the slip retains an identity as a slip. So even though we're filling in some of the land to create extra public program, it needs to feel like a water place. And that counts also for the activities that will be floating in and around the water. We want to provide multiple ways to get across the slip to create a really fine-grained pedestrian area that will bring the scale down of the harbor down to the scale of walking path. And create 4 different types of water spaces. So Parliament Slip is for everyone. It is a place you can come if you just want to look at the water, if you want to touch the water, if you want to float on the water, or even fall over in the water, and if you want to travel on the water. These are all opportunities that you can experience. And lastly, being a good neighbor. So we've put a lot of thought and consideration into the views and the adjacencies and how we might locate all of these programs relative to one another. It's also a vision of us and the client that it becomes a very active, seasonal, and multi-purpose waterfront. So these diagrams on the left show how we might change the programs around based on a kind of event situation and an everyday situation. And those translated into the programs that we see on the right-hand side and the kind of distribution. So this is a concept plan. I'll walk you through briefly, and we have some key dimensions here just to understand the scale. The first, I'll walk through each of these components one by one in the presentation, and then we'll have questions, comments, discussions at the end. So an integrated wave deck structure, which occupies the north and west side of the slip, that includes a kayak launch here on the west side, the harbor pools as well, and the pool facilities building integrated into the wave deck. Number 4, a floating pier. So these are pontoons, both inside and outside of the slip, that contain pavilions for concessions, next to some floating wetlands, which is contributing to the ecology component of the project. And lastly, on the outside, on the Lake Ontario side, a fixed water transportation, a fixed finger pier for water transportation. I also want to note that there are 2 bridges that I'll be talking about with respect to getting in and around and circulating around the slip. These are not part of the scope of this project, but they are being considered as part of the design, and that's the Parliament Street Bridge, which would be a pedestrian bridge connecting 2 halves of the Water's Edge Promenade across the south end of the slip, and a bridge to the Portlands, which again would be a pedestrian bridge. So going over some of the design components, here we see the integrated wave deck structure, which was largely inspired both by our own work, of course, in the Western waterfront, but also these integrated wooden structures that compose a lot of the harbor pools that we saw in the precedents that Adam showed earlier. We think that the integration of the pool building allows for a very important orientation moment within the design, where you arrive at this high point that's publicly accessible, and you can orient yourself to the slip and sort of decide, where do I want to go? What are all the activities that are happening here today? As we get down to the water, into the wave geometry of the architecture of the wave deck, the water amphitheater, as we are calling it, is a kind of informal water's edge seating that steps down towards the water. It gives you the feeling of arriving at the water's edge. Here is the place where you can come and sit with your loved ones or your family and watch the ballet of boats go by, and the people moving up and down the pier and across the bridge, and the boats moving in and out of the water. It's also a place to hang out when you're waiting to go into the pool, to take in the activity of the pool, even if you're not participating in the swimming events. And on the southern end, we see an opportunity here to create an accessible route, a connection to the future Parliament Bridge, to create a kind of really integrated circulation pathways across the site. These low points in the wave deck also double as a place to preserve the views to the water from Queen's Quay and from Parliament Street that will draw you in to the project. On the west side of the wave deck, there will be an integrated kayak or canoe or stand-up paddleboard launch. We're also looking with Moffat Nickel to integrate assisted kayak launches for wheelchair users for accessibility, but also launch assist areas to make getting in and out of a kayak easier and make it more accessible to beginning boaters. So a bit more about the harbor pools. We have taken a 2-basin approach, which gives flexibility in terms of programming and also size. The pool would be entered via Queen's Quay. That's where the address would be. And then after coming in through a check-in point, you would enter the pool facilities building, change, and then come out onto the pool deck. And with this whole experience would be also wheelchair accessible. We are aware that there will need to be fencing around the pool. That's a design component that we will work on. And here you can see the kind of integrated amenity building underneath the surface of the wave deck. So that's the ambition of the team for us and MJMA to work together to integrate these two programs. This is a scale comparison of the proposed Parliament slip pools and deck space and their bather capacities compared to 2 recent pools that have been built in the City of Toronto, Parkway Forest and the Wellesley Community Centre. So what we can see here is that the multiple basin approach is something that's quite successful and used in other parts of Toronto. And what we also think is really interesting is this not just the programmatic connection or the potential operations connections between the community center, the wave deck and Silo Park, but also an opportunity to, for example, connect the wave deck and the pool building and Silo Park topographically to create a continuous public realm experience. The feeling of swimming in the lake is the atmosphere that we would like to create within the project. So the ability to see and be seen when you're both inside and outside the fence, the ability to see Lake Ontario, even though it will be a chlorinated pool, so we're not swimming in lake water here. That's not the intention. And I'll move to the next slide. We're completely aware from the first day of the kind of gory details, we like to call it, of swimming pool design, including fences, lighting, noise, guarding requirements. These are things that our colleagues at MJMA are really, really well versed in. And we see them as design opportunities to create some really beautiful detailing along the waterfront that makes this a really special pool. All right. The next major programming piece in the project is floating pier. So as I mentioned, these are going to be built on prefabricated pontoon structures linked by a series of gangways to the water's edge promenade, which will give you, again, that feeling, that very marine experience of walking down a gangway and arriving at a pier. We have 2 kind of separate programs within the floating pier, an inner pier and an outer pier. The inner one would focus on smaller watercraft, perhaps an electric boat share, something that would have a democratic access and use, and 8 to 15 small-scale concessions and micro retail, which would be focused on family-friendly dining, the mom and pop style dining, as Adam mentioned, and outdoor seating to enjoy the inner slip. Connected again with a gangway or walkway coming out onto the outer pier in Lake Ontario. This would contain a full-scale destination restaurant, which is more elegant upscale style, about 150 seats for diners, and also transient mooring for larger boats on this pier on all 4 sides. As an architectural brief that we gave, the pier buildings, we feel, should follow a Toronto waterfront maritime vernacular and interpret this vernacular and reference to the Pier 6 heritage building at York Slip and bring color, which is a really important component, and contemporary architecture to the waterfront. So the scale of these buildings is meant to be small, human scale, to kind of contrast with the skyscraper environment that's created at the water's edge, and intimate and romantic. So we have some reference images here for the programs that we can expect on the floating pier. These are some architectural precedents put together by Michaela and Sweetapple that illustrate the direction, I would say, for the architectural language and moves that we can expect to see more resolution of in the schematic design DRP, at which point MJMA and MK Alliance Student Apple will be joining me in the presentation. So archetypal gables on the water's edge, small clustered buildings to create microclimates and framed views, non-precious materials, and lightweight roof assemblies to create porosity. So it's something to look forward to in the next phase. The project, while it has a lot of, let's say, human-based activities, also has the ambition to radically improve the aquatic habitat in the slip. So similar to how it was done on the other slips in the waterfront, all of the structures that are proposed being built within the slip have the opportunity to double as fish habitat improvement and ecological improvement underwater. What's new in this project that we haven't done before on the Toronto waterfront is the introduction of a new program to kind of match with the activation of the water's edge and the floating world creating here, which is a floating wetland, something visible that the public can come in and see and learn about ecology, learn about plants and the improvements that are happening underwater. The second to last program that we're going to talk about is the fixed water transportation pier. This would be a finger pier located on the outside of the slip in line with the outer edge of the Aqua Luna building to accommodate two types of water transportation, not giant Great Lakes cruise ships, but small scale water taxis and potential short haul ferries. And a little bit about the bridge, which is not in the scope, but is very prominent in the image, so we should talk about it. The bridge is proposed to be a pedestrian bridge that has a wheelchair accessible slope connected to the wave deck, which suffices for small watercraft we designed around these potential electric boat shares to pass underneath the center at a high water event, and also for pedestrians to pass under the second two columns in a high water event. Getting to and around the slip with circulation, it's a 360-degree circulation environment. From the north side, people arriving by transit by Queens Quay or by foot from the Distillery District along the Water's Edge Promenade, and most importantly also by boat from other slips along the waterfront, from the ferries, but also from the Portlands. So there's an interesting connection here because I know the Portlands has a lot of focus on kayaking and canoeing activities. It's a short distance that people would be able to cross the Keating Channel and come from a really green wetland environment into this dynamic marine environment of Parliament Slip. I mentioned a couple times the accessible routes that we're integrating into the project, and this highlights the entirety of the pool experience, the pool deck, and the entry into the pool itself, as well as the three key circulation routes across the slip and around the slip and down to all of the boating activities. So it's something that's very important and front of mind that we want to integrate best practice marine accessibility. There's a number of very important views this project is working towards. I mentioned already the kind of high point on the project that orients you towards Lake Ontario, but also views towards the silo to the Portlands from the restaurant and back into the slip if arriving by boat have all been considered within the design. And we see this as an opportunity to continue the excellence in wood design and materiality across from the central waterfront. There's a lot of wood proposed in the project, which might change as we progress the design, but the ambition is to maintain that language that we've established throughout the central waterfront for consistency and legibility of the kind of urban design. I want to touch a little bit on integrating Indigenous design and knowledge into our project. We are also working with Minokamik, who Shannon mentioned earlier, a local Indigenous design service collective led by local elders. And they are also leading the Indigenous engagement process for Parliament Slip. Throughout this process, we are working with Minokamik to engage the MCFN and other knowledge holders in the local Indigenous community to identify where placekeeping and Indigenous design and knowledge can best be integrated into the Parliament slip design. So in other words, we have no precise answers today on how it's going to be integrated, but we will work together in a process to identify where their knowledge can be best represented. We know this project is very special because of the many ways it deals with and interacts with water. And Shelley Charles, our elder who's leading the engagement process, chose World Water Day as very auspicious for us to open the project on site. And that was really great too. I wasn't there personally, but to be able to have that ceremony in person. Sustainability goals. We're still defining these together with the client team, but I wanted to talk about some of the opportunities within the project for sustainability. It is a largely public realm project, but our pool building component will inevitably be using energy to support the recreational activities. We're going to look for renewable and waste heat sources and appropriate technology to heat the outdoor pools, which we see as a great sustainability objective of the project. The materials, I mentioned the wood, responsible wood choice, but also investigation of recycled material, perhaps for the pavilion buildings. Water transportation and the electric boats, these are new kinds of movement across the waterfront, which are alternatives to the landside movement and also shared. The aquatic habitat and floating wetlands, these are opportunities to demonstrate leading sustainability principles. And lastly, this project will be undergoing life cycle analysis at various key milestones, of which the materiality will play an important part. We did consider the microclimate and the user comfort of the people on site, and we'll continue to do so throughout the project because we're proposing here swimming pools at the head of the slip at the base of many proposed skyscrapers. So wind and sun are at the top of our mind. The summer solstice sun study here and the spring autumn equinox sun study show you that the proposed harbor pools are in sun for most of the day. We would consider this a full sun environment in plant terms for swimmers, park goers, and for the patios on the floating pier. Microclimate and wind mitigation will be important for both these locations, which could be integrated into the fencing while still maintaining views of the lake, and into the way that the architecture creates microclimate on the floating pier. And then wave mitigation is also something that we're considering. We know this is a pretty wavy part where the Keating Channel meets the lake, and that's changing, of course, with the Portlands. But we will be looking at making this a more comfortable boating environment because we have structures coming down into the water, namely the bridge and the floating restaurant, that can help with wave mitigation. Year-round activation is a goal that for Waterfront Toronto and Parks, Forestry and Recreation that our team is taking quite seriously. Right now, we are working together to determine what the most suitable winter program is for the site as a whole. What we are tentatively planning is that floating elements such as the pier and the wetlands will be left in the water throughout the winter and winterized with bubblers, for example. The kayak launch, similar to other launches throughout the waterfront, would be removed in the winter. And the use of the swimming pool area, which is quite a large footprint, and the winter exploring, including converting the pool deck to a flexible public space, like for a market, winter swimming potentially, which is something that other Nordic countries have embraced, such as in Finland and Russia, and or swimming year-round indoors with an enclosed structure. So in conclusion, and this rendering I've been showing throughout the entire presentation is at nighttime is intentional because we think that the atmosphere of Parliament Slip is one that is the potential to be really, yeah, romantic, waterfront, intimate, a place that where something is always happen, where you can go and watch people at all times of year and even in the evenings. And it will become an active, we hope, democratic public space that has the pleasure of achieving what we think hit 9 out of 10 of the kind of master plan visions that we have created with Waterfront Toronto over the years. So I'd like to welcome your questions, comments, and discussion. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Shelley. So I guess we're ready for questions. I know it's 11:20. We're supposed to finish at 12, but since we're just having lunch, maybe we have a little flexibility here. So who wants to start with questions? Anyone on the panel? Oh, okay. I see a few hands. Fatty, to kick it off, then Nina Marie.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Just a quick question about Parliament Street and the Parliament Street Plaza. Do you know, can you speak a little bit more about that and how you arrive from the north side of the city, and if that street, do you have any kind of estimate about how much car traffic would be arriving through there? Is that a more flexible plaza space? You spoke a lot about arriving from the east and west and south, but I'm just wondering about the north accessibility.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Parliament Street, the current design for it, we have set out within as part of the Queen's Quay project. It includes a 3-lane cross section with bicycle lanes on either side. And that is really consistent with the kind of north-south arrival experience that you would have at Yonge or Jarvis or Sherbourne coming in the future. And so in respect to the hierarchy and the type of street and the amount of traffic we're expecting, that's what we're planning for. The thing that makes Parliament Street really special, we think, is that it has these massive setbacks on the side, which we've named the Parliament Plaza. We think that and we're actually, Westside Dita are also the public realm designers for the Quayside Public Realm project. So we are actually also designing this, and we will come to the design review panel later this year about that. But the concept for this plaza that we saw was the scale of an urban forest, something a really immersive green environment actually that steps down between the scale of the Gardiner Expressway and the skyscrapers and helps you arrive at the waterfront. So for pedestrians and cyclists and automobile drivers alike.
Yeah, I'm aware that it's in a separate project, so I was just wondering about this kind of connection and arrival through the 2 crosswalks and the traffic lights. Like, is that something, I would imagine it would be a huge like crossing from, Harborfront Center on Queens Quay, and if this is such an incredibly active site, if there is a kind of north-south connection in that design in the moments of those 2 intersections, and how you're just picturing that adjacency at those 2 arrival spots, where the zebra crosswalks arrive at the site, if there is any sort of consideration about that access point.
Yeah, I think that the eastern crosswalk certainly will align with the entrance very closely for the pool building. And that will kind of, if you're going to the pool, it's a very logical connection, but that's also where you would kind of get up onto this high point above the pool building to orient yourself to the site. The west crosswalk actually would align with a low point in the wave deck and also at the water's edge. So that's the place where you, as a member of the public, if you don't want to climb up to the building, also are standing here on your arrival in Queens Quay and orienting yourself. You see the pools, you see the lake, you see the boats. So that's kind of the high-low experience when you get to the slip.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, I have Nina Marie, then I'll go to Jana online, and then we'll work our way around. Marie?
Thank you, Shelley. That really super helpful, and I'm certainly going to express a lot of support for a lot of what you're doing. I just have a question first about the really interested to see some mention of kind of small scale sustainable water-based transport as part of this plan. And I noticed that you've acknowledged there's a plan for, say, the Toronto Niagara Ferry. And I was just wondering is that a plan that is already in place adjacent to the Parliament Slip Plan, or is it something that's still quite speculative and you're just giving a nod to it? I wasn't sure if you could just speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, we don't have any vendors fixed for any of the marine uses yet within the project. So the ferry that was shown was a speculative ferry.
It's
that
just
was
helpful.
yeah.
Helpful to see that. I can come back to that in comments. Thank you. And the second question, I just want this question to be heard as entirely supportive and recognizing of the challenge around swimming pools, but so great to see this. Could you let us know what was the rationale for a chlorinated pool versus a saltwater chlorinated system that is, knowing how many people are allergic to chlorine, bromine, and that we're trying to do something very sustainable here. Is there a particular reason that at this scale it isn't considered, or is it cost, for example?
I mentioned chlorine pool because of the health codes in Canada that require some level of chlorination within a public swimming pool. It's not to exclude the fact that it could be a salt water and chlorine system. At this point, we don't, this is, well, what more MJMA's specialty, but we haven't ruled it out, is what I'm trying to say.
Great. So just
Yeah.
the chlorine is shorthand for antibacterial, but we could talk
Yeah.
about ways to what that might look like. And similarly, again, with respect to the pools, this configuration is, obviously this has been a long process to get to here, but just so that we're seeing this, these are intended as combined but separated, if that makes sense. In other words, when you enter the pool enclosure, you have access to either of these two basins.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Jana. I think you've been waiting patiently online there. Can you hear us?
Yep, thanks, Paul.
Go
Thanks,
ahead.
Shelley. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Shelley. Just two really brief questions. The first is, I noticed on the plan of the change rooms that they were gender specific, and I was wondering if there's been any discussion or thought about having all gender change facilities.
Definitely. The diagram that was shown on the screen is kind of, maybe we can call it antiquated nowadays, because it's based on the Ontario Building Code, which separates, as you know, bathrooms out by gender. So it's meant to be taken more as a diagram for how much interior space we thought would be needed to support the swimming pools. All gender facilities are definitely something that the design team is looking at, and MJMA has done a lot of work in the city of Toronto with these types of facilities, and we would like to make as inclusive of an environment as possible on this project.
That's great, and I know MJM has done successfully done a lot of them, so I think it's entirely within their wheelhouse to be able to do that here. And the second question is there any part of the wave deck that could be accessible?
Accessible to wheelchairs?
To wheelchairs and people with mobility constraints.
Yeah, certainly. Let me go to this slide. Actually, most of the wave deck is accessible. So it's what we tried to do here is highlight the route that goes east-west across the slip that we felt was really important for that everyone be able to make this kind of shortcut if you were walking along the Water's Edge Promenade and didn't take the bridge and wanted to cross here at the slip. And so that route, along with the route across the wave deck and down to the kayak launch, and also part of the Water's Edge area would also be wheelchair accessible, so that you can access, if you are in a wheelchair, seating at the waterfront edge of the wave deck.
Great, thanks a lot, Shelley.
Okay, thanks, Jana. David, I think you had your hand up next, if I recall.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Can you hear me all right, Shelley?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yep.
I'm not using the microphone. Just a couple of questions. Thanks for your presentation. A lot of really inspiring ideas there. One is that I wondered if you could expand. I noticed in one of your diagrams it talks about a market. There's kind of I don't know whether that's a kind of seasonal idea, but I wondered what you meant by that from a programming point of view. In other words, how will these decks be used if, for example, if the pool is shut down in the winter? And then the other question I had, you can answer them both together, is what are we talking about in terms of the vertical kind of separation from the water itself, from the lake level? Are there, how low are you getting? How close are you getting to the water with those stepped edges? And can you actually touch the water itself, or are you always separated by almost a kind of dock wall height structure in some way?
Sure. Good questions. Okay, so the first question was the reference to the market. What does that mean? A market was one of the programs that we tested spatially of how we might lay that out. For example, for a special event. And in this diagram, what it shows is that one thing we're considering is for winter use, could the pool deck, for example, be transformed into a public plaza space? And then because winter markets is something that in our public survey, people are really excited about and would like to see more of. We also see the potential for the pavilions, for example, because they're such a small scale, to be converted into a winter market environment. But also if we're thinking in terms of summertime, laying it out along the water's edge promenade was also an idea. But these were like program testers, and I think that the winter use, as it develops, we'll be able to answer that question a bit better at the schematic design phase. Your second question was about grades. Let me see if I'll go back to the end slide so I can, or maybe this one. So the dock wall elevations around the entire slip are roughly 77.05. And so for reference, the summer average lake level is around 75.2, and this, the 76.2 is the 100-year high, and the average. Let me go to this section. I don't want to get the numbers wrong, so I want to read it off the slide for you. Yeah, so our long-term summer average is 75.04. So we're talking about between the average water level, a 2-meter height differential between the water's edge promenade and where all the edges of the wave deck are connecting down to the water. The floating elements, so the kayak launch and the floating pier, will have a very low freeboard, about 30 to 50 centimeters. So those are really the places where you can get down and touch the water on a daily basis. Because of the nature of the construction of the wave decks, that we're making them out of wood, the intention is not for any part of the wave deck to be underwater within a 100-year level from resiliency perspective. So the kind of water amphitheater that's labeled here that dips down, these are not places that you're sort of meant to touch the water unless you have a really high water event. That's what the floating components are actually for.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Jeff?
Yeah, can you just clarify, you may have mentioned, so the wave decks are there, they're wood, but what's the surface area around the pool? Like, is that all meant to be like boardwalk wood, or?
I think for the visualization purposes, because we were really inspired by the harbor pools examples, for example, in Scandinavia, a continuous material experience was something we're interested in. However, I think as we get into the schematic design, the pool deck actually needs to have a certain level of friction rating for health and safety. And so wood may not be the answer in the end to that.
And if it is year round, what would be, like, how, have you thought about ice management? Like, you're not doing salt on wood.
No, I think that if we move toward a year-round model, where, say, if this becomes a plaza, we definitely have to look at shrinking what we think is the wooden wave deck footprint, and we might have a change in materiality. between those between the pool area and the kind of water's edge area.
Thanks.
Okay, Gina?
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
Sorry. 2 questions. Hey, Shelley, Gina, nice
Hey.
to meet you. Really beautiful presentation. And like Nina Marie, super supportive. Could you talk a little bit about your attitude towards the relationship between the entry and Silo Park? I'm not sure I heard much of that elsewhere. It's really clear.
Like why the location for the pool building is on the east side of the project.
Just really how you see the relationship between the pool, the plaza, and that green space.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll go back to this section here. We see a potential for, as I mentioned earlier, a kind of topographic connection between the park and the, let's say, the facilities building roof, wave deck, accessible roof of the wave deck, and to create kind of undulating, rolling experience and better connect the two spaces. We think that the entrance off of the eastern side of the project is also helps us in terms of opening up the views with relationship to Parliament Slip and the plazas as well when we studied the view framing.
Thank you. And then this might be a couple of 101 questions for me, but could you talk a little bit more about the extent of fill and how that came to be, just from my context? And also, building on that, any stormwater infrastructure or outletting here to the basin?
Yeah, I'll answer that question first, actually, because it's a bit easier. The stormwater, there's a combined sewer outflow that is emptying actually to the west of this project on the one street over, and that's been constructed as part of the Bayside development. So we have no CSO water entering directly into the slip. In terms of stormwater management, the plan is for the components within the slip to drain towards the lake. And the size of the pools, that's also a very good question. And the amount of fill, the amount of fill, in short, is driven by the amount of pool space that we have received as a kind of brief, and that we thought would, make a big enough pool to really create an urban attraction. And the biggest pool was sized to be able to accommodate a 25-meter lane setup if required. And the size in the pool and the depth of the pool and the capacity drive the size of the facilities building. So we've actually really tried to minimize the amount of lake fill while creating, the type of leisure destination that we're looking for. And the new dock wall will be constructed in a way so that the pools are set back quite a few meters from the edge of the dock wall to allow for the structural tiebacks. And so that's kind of the knock-on effect of elements.
Okay, Gina? Other questions for Emily, please?
Hi, Shelley. Thank you. Such an impressive presentation. My first question is focused more on the ecology and what you had mentioned about the aquatic habitat that will be underneath the wave decks. And I'm just wondering what the relationship with that and all of the activity that's going to be going on in the basin, and what your thoughts are on that piece. And then the other kind of sub question to that too has to do with the floating wetlands and the relationship with those as well. I know it's early days, but if you could give us a little bit more information about that, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. So all of the proposed aquatic habitat improvements will be happening, at the lake bed level, which is, let's say, 4 meters approximately we have between the top of the dock wall to the bottom of the lake. So because the marine uses we're proposing for inside the slip are mainly human-powered watercraft and very small scale boats, we don't see an issue between competing uses, let's say, of the habitat underwater and the boating activity at the surface. The floating wetlands, we are intrigued by this image on the bottom right hand side that a small human powered watercraft like a kayak would be able to boat between the wetlands and kind of experience it up close in a more tactile way. And also for the users of the floating pier to be able to see them as well. So they're not going to be accessible public spaces that you can walk on. I think that would be just for maintenance. But the floating wetlands will be in quite close proximity to the users of the slip.
Great. And then I have, sorry, one more question. In terms of just modeling the water's edge and the effect of the wave action, and do you have somebody who's modeling that in the flooding coming down the Keating Channel and its impact on the floating piers?
Yes, we have a modeling specialist, Limnotech, who was also working on the Keating Channel works. So they are going to perform some wave modeling to which our marine engineers will respond into in the design.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any other questions from the panel? Pat and Eric.
Just quickly, I think I went to, I think Blue Mountain Ski Resort has a pool that you're in the change room and you actually don't go outside, you just swim from the change room into the pool. And it's not exercise swimming in the winter, but it is kind of, I kind of like it because I'm always cold and, for a day of skiing, it's sort of good. So is that something that you've considered as like it would be pretty phenomenal if you could go and get into a really steamy hot water in the middle of winter in downtown
without having
Toronto.
to run outside.
Yeah.
Bonaventure has that too.
Is that that's what George was talking about? Yeah, okay. Just
Enter the water inside and swim.
yeah, like you don't even, you kind of, your head feels the temperature outside, that's about it.
That's a very nice experience.
That's a great idea, actually.
It's a good experience.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Pat. Any response, Shelley, to that? Just more of a suggestion, I think. Eric?
Days?
Couple of questions. How do you get to a kayak to the kayak launch in terms of, is it from a rental place? Is it people can bring it? Like, I'm just trying to think about from a practical perspective, how you get there.
Yeah, I think we're still looking at a combination potentially for private storage and for rentals, but mainly rentals. We see this as a place that could be with one operator who would kind of lay out the boats and then people could come and rent them. So there could be a combination of a little bit of storage on the floating pier itself and some on land, but we've accounted for storage similar to what you would see at Reese Slip for on one side of the slip, that many kayaks.
Thanks. I think that's in my commentary, something to think about. These can be a bit eyesore sometimes, so having them integrated very well is a key. One thing I'm also intrigued is the pool building. You've got the change room under, kind of buried under the deck. But there's one drawings that kind of, is there an exit or an entrance from Queen's Quay? I was trying to understand how does the topography, the relationship to Queen's Quay, is there like an additional exit there? So that's something maybe you can maybe provide a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have
come in from the pool side only.
No, at the entrance, the proposed entrance would be from the street side on Queen's Quay. It's very faint in this plan, but there's a little
there would be a change of the deck. There's some topography change. There's some doors happening.
Yeah, there will be one controlled access point into the pool, and then the wave deck will be fenced off for a certain area. That's the pool area.
Okay, is that it for questions? Can we move to comments from the panel? And maybe start off with the landscape architects, if you don't mind, Nina Marie.
Thank you, Shelley. I know many will say this. Such confidence in this team and your thoughtfulness. I really appreciated the emphasis on the principles first, the 4 principles that carry through in the design. I just would say a couple things on to strengthen maybe and amplify those principles, and to the extent possible before we get to the next phase of design. The sustainable personal watercraft, really lovely idea. So appreciate the scale of this whole thing being oriented to the human, to the sustainable, the individual, even in terms of moving across the water. Lovely to hear plans for a Toronto Niagara ferry. I know that's well out of your scope, but it's nice to be able to touch on those as opportunities for the kind of smaller scale green and blue sustainably powered opportunities. Similarly, with the aesthetic, I appreciate very much that you're looking for something that is vernacular, maritime. You know, the salt box, I get why we, certainly from McCain Lyons, I can see that reference, but it would be really great to find a way to incorporate rain gathering on site in keeping with Indigenous principles of water access. The sacred quality of water here I know is paramount, but at the same time to make that real and to show in a way that collects and harvests water restoratively would be so lovely in whatever capacity that's possible. I know that's something you're very sensitive to, and I appreciate so much that you're working with Minakemik and Indigenous placekeeping. I hope that that engagement will be able to extend for you creatively beyond just the placekeeping, but to include in placekeeping wetland legibility, access to water, water as the resource, and so on. I'm sure you're thinking about those things. They just occur to me as I'm listening to you talk about these opportunities. Especially since we started with the important signal and symbol of water as a sacred resource in this ceremony that was held. I hope that we'll see an opportunity for that to come back. The floating wetlands are really exciting to me. I know there'll be other comments about those from our landscape architecture colleagues. I think there's a huge opportunity here for legibility and transparency, even if it's not about access, but visual access, what they signify, who occupies them. I mean by non-humans, are they accessible to particular birds or turtles or whatever, depending on the amount of activity in this. I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I think also to set a kind of precedent for how we see wetlands that are not only contained within a water body, but actually contained within themselves, that there's a kind of microcosm there to be seen by kayakers or individual watercraft operators and so on. So really very happy to see all this. I really look forward to the next steps. Very supportive of the pools. I know others will speak about this. It's such a challenge, I know, given our public health and parks requirements for many people. Accessibility is super important, and I hope that there'll be an opportunity to really kind of push the envelope around the antibacterial quality, for example, exploring saltwater chlorination as an option, just to bring people closer to that water experience. The final thing I wanted to say is just if there's a way to keep those pools separated by heat in winter, I think that'd be super exciting to explore that waste heat, sustainable option for waste heat recovery for people who really want that heated pool experience, and then to have another one that's actually just warm enough, meaning that for people who really want to engage in winter swimming, that there is that option, especially if the water isn't mixing between these two basins. I think that'd be super. And I hope that we don't ever have to go the way of the unsustainable bubble. I really, really hope that we'll be able to be outdoors. It's just such a great project for that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna Marie. Fatty, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much, Shelley. I have no doubt whatsoever this will be one of the most popular, well-attended, and iconic places in the city year-round. You really can start to see how Parliament Slip is going to be a crown jewel along Queen's Quay. So this is maybe one of the reasons why I was also asking about the arrival points from the city to the north, but also east and west. So these thresholds and entry points from all sides as they intersect with the site are going to be really, really important arrival points. So just make sure that they are generous in whatever format they do as you go through iterations of the design. As you mentioned too, and I think I just want to underscore this, that the kind of relational opportunity between the lake filling and the building of the swimming pools likely won't come again. So I really appreciate kind of enforcing that connection and all the background research you did on the need and necessity for these pools. And I know there's going to be a lot of important attention paid on winter activation, but I just wanted to bring to your consideration the kind of long-term projections for expected increase in summer temperatures and the number of summer hot days that are coming our ways, and how that also intersects with issues of equity. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the Intact Center from the University of Waterloo released the first ever report last week about the impact of heat on Canadian cities. And so places like Parliament Slip and these pools and being by the lake is just going to be really, really important, not just for recreation, but critical relief from hot summer days. So I just want to reinforce how important and exciting this is on multiple fronts, including the kind of questions around access and equity. And this being such an attraction, you know, I'm sure will also help support a lot of the economic opportunities for retail, restaurants, markets, and kiosks. So I see them as integrated, and I see them as really exciting. So thank you so much for a really inspiring presentation, for designing such a cool space for Toronto.
Thanks, Fatty. Since we're down at the end of the table, Gina, you want to go next?
Hi, another landscape architect glowing about how incredible I think this is going to be as a space. Just such intelligent diagramming, especially appreciated the thoughtfulness with the boating diagrams and being able to think about how to partition and think about the space to allow for different grains and experiences, and making that super legible. I was kind of looking for, and I think it would be really strong if there was something that also did the same for water, that showed it more as a system across this canal, that or slip, that you know, I think about that fill zone, and I think there must be some way of thinking about parts of that as being a porous filter between what seems like a heavy, you know, street urban condition to the waterfront. And is there some way that that becomes part of a water narrative that's threaded through, so that you have these different experiences of water cleaning and expression that might go, you know, from the land side terrestrial to the floating wetlands and to the bottom surface kind of restoration. So I think there's something akin to your boating diagram that you could think about for water systems that could make this even more special and hot. And I think as someone who's spent a lot of time in my life on floating wetlands, and I saw you showed a project that I know intimately. They're really, really technically complicated, as I'm sure you know or you will know. Wave action and its impact on plant selection and resilience are going to be key, but really applaud you taking it on and thinking about how to do it here. I think if I were to do it again, and it's exactly what Nina Marie said, I would double down on interpretation and really making the story of why these investments, both the things that you can't see that are underwater and the things that you do experience and see at the surface, would be, you know, and I'm not a big fan of signage for signage sakes, but it's some way of letting the common person who doesn't know these systems learn from that in a really specific way. So that's what I could offer. And then the only other piece is really the relationship to the park feels unresolved to me. And I think that's partly just the level of design that you're at. And I could tell from your answer and from the diagramming in the section that there's a lot more thought there than is visible to me. But it just seems somewhat tenuous compared to so many of the other relationships along the canal that feel super intentional. So maybe next time we can just look at that a little more carefully. But thank you.
Thanks. Emily?
Hi, Shelley. Thanks again for just a phenomenal presentation and really thoughtful way of just explaining all of the different drivers that are influencing the design, which is going to be fantastic. I'm so excited to see this kind of, as you said, the bookend that I actually see it a little bit more as a node in a way of turning the waterfront, and as it moves over towards the Portlands as well. So I think that that's something to be thinking about, that it's not an end, but it's actually a transition. Love the way that you were talking about how it's kind of complementary and a contrast with the Portlands as well, that it's very much an urban space, and then you've got the Portlands with the naturalization, and I think that's a very strong way of thinking about it. But I also wonder, thinking about what Gina was just saying with the diagramming of the water, if there's another kind of diagramming that's happening with the vegetation as well, starting from the urban forest that is happening in the square, and then as you move through and think about the dock walls and the planting, the street tree planting kind of approach, and then the vegetation. It seems like there's another kind of narrative to be thinking about with that as well, with the kind of urban forestry and that ecology and how it turns. The other aspect I was wondering about too is, I mean, you've been incredibly sensitive about the overall context as you describe all of the influences. I would also encourage you to maybe look to your east a little bit more and look at the impact of the Keating Channel that that eastern edge is going to have. I'm having a hard time visualizing what the Keating Channel precinct is going to feel like with the floating concession or restaurant at the end of it, and what that means. I'm not saying that it doesn't. I think it could be successful. I just think that relationship spatially really needs to be looked at a larger scale to understand that kind of transition, as I was saying, and then also making it feel like the Keating Channel is part of the larger waterfront instead of kind of the back door. And I think that's something to be looking at. But have to commend you. I'm really excited. I can't wait to see the next iteration of this. And I'm all for the pool and winter swimming as well.
Great. David?
Great, thanks. And just echoing support for, again, for the presentation and the other proposal in front of us, and also for the previous comments on the scheme. So I won't reiterate those, although I fully support what my colleagues have been speaking to. My original question about touching the water was a kind of deliberate one. Obviously, but I was recently walking along the waterfront, and I was thinking just how remarkable, for example, the Copenhagen waterfront is, and the ability of people now, after an incredible cleanup, for people to just jump. Literally, the kids line those docks and jump right into the harbor. And I wondered, as I was walking along, whether our inner harbor would ever be that. And maybe not in my lifetime, likely not in my lifetime. I know that there are big water quality issues there to deal with, but I think that this project is really what that kind of idea is about. It's about touching water on the waterfront. There are a few places where we do that. Hanlon's Point on the island, the beach, and various places around, but they're few and far between. Certainly nothing in the central waterfront. And so I think, just in support of this pool idea, I think it's a wonderful proposition that I think, absolutely, I'm in support of. I think that and then I think that those moments where you can walk down on those smaller piers and even be that much closer to the water, I think are really critical, and they need to be very public. So those floating restaurants and that kind of thing, I think ensuring the publicness around them, that they don't end up being kind of privatized cafes, is important in terms of your democratic public space proposition, democratic waterfront proposition. And I do think that the area around the pool really needs to be calibrated. That fenced area that we're not kind of seeing in full yet needs to be calibrated based on what you think, or what the team, I guess, thinks on Waterfront Toronto might happen around it, because it feels to me like the pool is going to be so popular that area has to be large enough to be able to accommodate a lot of people. And I think that's where people are going to gravitate to. And I'm not sure about the wave decks around it and how useful they would be, for example, for a market if they're not flat. So I think that whole programming piece is really important to calibrate the size of that a pool deck, basically.
I also think that the, just in terms of Fadi's comment with the change of microclimate, I actually think that there are going to be a lot of people down here who are going to be seeking shade, frankly, around the pool, on the wave deck, and I wondered whether there was some way for temporary structures, maybe, yes, it's filled with sun all day long, but for me, half an hour in the sun, and then I would really literally have to find shade. So I think that shading component is really going to be an important one. I support the idea of the use of materials, really as the bookend to the bookend to Harborfront, and tying the materials that you've deployed so beautifully through the central waterfront to the west to terminate here. I think it's a very strong proposition. And finally, I think just looking at the diagram, it feels like the historic industrial frame of the slip is retained visually. I think that reference of the slip, the heritage configuration, or that figure of the slip and the silo itself is an important one to understand and make legible, so that you see how that industrial heritage landscape was once kind of located here or really configured here, I guess. And that's it. So thank you. I really appreciate the presentation.
Thanks, David. Other comments from panel members? Eric, looks like, yeah, that's.
Thank you. Yeah, a few comments. Well, thank you for a great presentation. I think it's very comprehensive. It gives us a really good ideas and lots of comfort about what's coming. Some area here for consideration, and I think is important to keep as the project continues to develop, is the area around the pool, around the slip. I think it's important that looking at the space from Aqualuna all the way to the silo, thinking a bit holistically. It does feel right now a bit, there's something to the east, there's something to the west. I think that protecting the relationship between that space, because to me it is one space that's going to have a special building to the southeast. There is the silo park, there's the silo. So thinking holistically about how all these elements are coming together, how they communicate with one another. What are the paths? How do they connect? I think, and not that you have control over what's necessarily happening next door, but seeing that these lines are blending naturally are quite important. I think are quite important. So that it doesn't just feel like, a whole series of individual parts that are sitting in a space that is framed by these major structure. On the I alluded to the north entrance, the entrance to the pool from Queens Quay. I think it needs to be very carefully considered. There is the way that I think it's being looked at. It's a major change of the deck where like we don't want to create a barrier from Queens Quay. I think they need the relation. I think some views looking down to Queens Quay about how is that entrance, how is the deck, how is the whole structure relates to Queens Quay, to the future silo park, and to the south. I think are quite critical. Because I think I don't think it's resolved yet, so it's just something to think about. And also just looking at your overall map. I don't know. What is is there a landscape strategy that comes with that area? David talks about the area of, are there places for maybe additional planting, for some shading? Is there something that needs to happen there? But it does feel a little bit empty in that area, or that something special maybe needs to happen. There was in terms of the location of the pool, I think a pool is great. I love it. There was a question I was looking at your sun study, understanding, should the change room be on the other side? Should the pool be moved to the east where maybe there is a little bit more sun, especially in those shoulder season? That was something, whether, it is the right location or whether it should shift or not, be mirrored. That's something just to consider. I'll let you look into it. the design of the fence of the area, because those are obviously needs to be secured. People have to be careful about their access. In the next session, I mean, obviously, this is something we need to see, because this will have a major impact on the design of the space, making sure that the fence doesn't create a barrier, and something that is, from your diagram is very fluid. Feels like you can walk from one area to the other, so you don't want to lose that. But the fence has a potential to have a major impact on that. The kayak area launch, I think this is, thinking about how storage facilities are integrated, because they can be quite, they're not necessarily always the nicest thing. So it's thinking how it's integrated, and how if other folks wants to bring their boat to the boat launch, I mean, that's just something to, like, just practically about how you do it. And the last thing is, I'm very intrigued with the boat transit facilities. That is a very positive things in terms of how we continue to complement our mobility network in the city. So continue to think in terms of what are the other things that will come with it? For example, will there be bike share facility there, other facilities, because these type of facilities tend to want to be integrated with other mode, and then how you can easily transfer, for example, from that boat facility to the bus, to the LRT stop, or to a taxi, or to an Uber area. Those are all things to just think about, that overall mobility strategy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I'm going to go to Janet. She's been waiting, and then Betsy. Janet?
Thanks, Paul, and thank you, Shelley. I concur with all my panel colleagues about what a great presentation. West 8 never fails to delight and to stimulate a lot of really good conversation. The first thing I'd like to make a impassioned plea for is to really seriously consider a sauna as part of the fundamental thesis on 12-month-a-year bathing culture in the city. You showed some examples. I've been to places in Helsinki, Copenhagen, Reykjavik, Iceland, Trondheim, and they all have saunas, and the inclusion of a sauna addresses Pat's issue of being cold all the time. If you can go into a sauna for a couple of minutes and then into the water, you can actually walk outside. To me, it becomes a fundamental equity issue. Right now, there are only private places where you can experience the full sauna winter bathing experience, and this is so exciting as a new democratic space in the city that it would be a real gift to augment it with that one additional amenity. I also think, and certainly your Indigenous consultants, Minnow Comic and Matt Hickey, can talk to this far better than I can, but I see a really strong relationship between the inclusion of a sauna and an Indigenous component. I have a sense that a sweat is a more private affair, more of a ceremony, but I think thematically there's something really rich to explore there. With that, I think that the other element that could be really related and very interesting as a winter function is some kind of fire component that could have a multitude of activities associated with it. I think in the swing shoulder seasons and in the winter, that could be a really great addition as well, and thematically related to that. So I would really advocate that you think about that and see what can be done. Of course, outdoor swimming is just a fantastic experience, and the more that we can do to get people to experience that in the winter months, I think it'll break down a lot of barriers. The second thing is just, I guess, a counterpoint to Eric's winter storage of boats and kayaks. I actually think it's part of the stuff of marine life and should be actually not hidden, but thought of not just as an architectural element, but as an environmental element. So if you stack those up in a kind of density and you locate them in the right place, perhaps in winter they, from a microclimate perspective, can break the wind, and that would be really interesting. But I think overall, part of the driver, which I think you're really getting at, is to not make this a kind of replication or simulation, but it is actually a hard working marine environment. And so I would really encourage you to take the kayaks, the boats, all those elements, put them in a storage component that's, you know, well placed, and make it part of that part of the design. And finally, I'm sure this is just too early, but I think also from an equity perspective, there's a lot of discussion about how the pools are really important, and lots of those examples of pools that you've shown, you know, so for instance, at Kitts Beach in Vancouver, people stake out a place in the morning and they'll have their lunches there, like they'll picnic right by the pool. And so it made me think that as an equity issue, where people can picnic, where they can, say, bring their own lunch and have a place to sit, is really a fundamental part of this experience. Even I think it's entirely laudable to have more mom and pop places and the smaller family-oriented concessions, but even they're really expensive for some people. So I think it's really important to design places by the pool, places with shade where people can come and, you know, basically hang out all day for the price of, you know, the TTC fare.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Betsy?
Thanks.
Thank you for the great presentation. The panel's been looking at proposals for this area for a really long time, so it's particularly exciting to see something come together. I think you need a slip that's twice as big as the one you have. I have concerns, as David does, with capacity. Could you bring numbers to us at your next visit for how many boats you can actually fit of each type in that central slip area? Because from the renderings, I counted, I think, 25 in that central area, and it looked pretty full. What's going to be the capacity of the floating piers? Are the two bridges crossing the wetlands adequate, or are there going to have to be kiosks on the shore side that say, okay, we can't fit anyone on for the next hour because there just isn't the room? So capacity on the floating piers. And then if the wetland zone serves as more of a porous access, or if it truly is a gated threshold, as it kind of reads to me right now, does this mean that you can tighten up the plaza on the north side of the pool to get more water, and to maybe tighten up the wetland zone to get a little bit more pier in some way? I also agree that the bring more information about the elevations on Queens Quay and the relationship to the park than you think you need to. It reminds me of the beginning discussion of the parking lot entrance on Harborfront Plaza, which fronted and became a building on Queens Quay. There's going to be a ton of questions about that. Because it really is different from the wave deck coming down and gently meeting Queens Quay on the roadside. I think lastly, I'm very excited to start to look at the architecture on the floating piers. Just my questions will probably be about the scale of the salt box typology, and understanding that the iconography of that type doesn't become trite relative to its function and the type of architecture that it's surrounding. I know the intention is that it's supposed to be differently scaled and a different type of building, but it could very easily swing in the wrong direction.
Yep, thanks very much, Betsy. Anyone else? George, Pat, and Jeff.
Everybody wants.
I think we've covered everybody then.
Yeah. A lot to talk about.
George?
Yes, I can totally take off from what Betsy was just saying. I think this issue of the cumulative impact of the number of programmatic ambitions that you've set out may need a second look in terms of the actual available water and land territory you actually have to work with. I think that's a real consideration worth pondering. I want to focus on what I would call the geometry of the the north end, the filled in portion. You've got the pool, you've got the wave deck going up and down, you've got some programmatic elements which require to be accommodated, the change rooms, however they end up being configured. Jana is actually suggesting the addition of a sauna, which I'm certainly not going to object to. I mean, I can see the kind of programmatic logic of it, but it comes back to Betsy's point about how much will fit. And then Jana also suggested formalizing the structure of the storage, of the winter storage of the boating apparatuses, which is implies some more architecture. And then on top of all of that, there's this argument of the preservation of views of the water from Queens Quay and from further north on Parliament Street. So finally, I'll just fold in microclimate, which you yourself have tabled and which a number of my colleagues have commented on. That suggests to me an extraordinarily complex system of geometrical organization at the north end of the slip. And by the way, I didn't even mention the security fence, but it seems to me your scheme already implies a certain number of points where there are significant changes of vertical elevation. The facade of the changing room building, the area below the high point of the wave deck. And it seems to me that you need, first of all, the fence has got to be big enough to accommodate the people that want to assemble around the pool. And I think that you should do your damnedest to position the fence so it aligns as much as possible with those points where the vertical elevation change has to happen in any event, which will actually reduce the obtrusiveness of the fence within the scheme overall, at the same time as enabling it to perform its protective function. So I think that's an extraordinarily complex set of three-dimensional geometrical relationships, especially when you think they all have to accommodate views from the north. So I support the pool or the pools. I actually support the proposition of the winter swimming. I think that's a very good idea. But like other people who've mentioned it, I think the bubble is a bad idea. And indeed, you cannot have the bubble and preserve the views from the north. Those are mutually exclusive. So I think if you want winter swimming, you're going to have to look at it being outdoor heated without the bubble.
Okay, thanks, George. Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I just think this is such an amazing opportunity for City of Toronto, and I was thinking how great it would be to swim outdoors on the lake and sort of thinking about doing it. But then I look at, you're gonna hate me, and I think it's an amazing presentation and the diagram and all is that great, but I don't think the pool's in the right place. I know that we've got landfill issues and it makes some sense there, but if we're actually achieving the kind of immersive experience, and if you say swimming is the most unique thing here, that is going to be the draw for all Tonians, then you don't really want to be overlooked by a streetcar. You want an immersive experience. You want to feel like what is achieved by those European examples, which they're right out onto the body of the water. And I don't know what that means in terms of floating or landfill. But if that is the kind of radical proposition of this, then the pool should be where the restaurant is. I also think putting a commercial venture at the end of Keating Channel is the wrong thing to do as well. So, yeah, I would go if I could be hot there in the winter and it was, at the end of Keating Channel, for sure. But otherwise, don't think so. It's too conventional.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, Jeff, I think that'll wrap it up.
I got a lot of stuff for you. I apologize, but I'm glad Pat went before me, and I'll get to that. I'm going to talk about some sustainability things first, and so energy. I know you're looking at renewable energy solutions. I think it's a There's a couple really important opportunities here. I think the first is obviously integrating with the new development that's going on. I think you should be looking at some sort of ground source district energy system connected to the building, along with heat recovery connected to those buildings, because there's going to be waste heat, particularly in the summertime with air conditioning. It's also just looking at the cost effectiveness of boreholes. If they're going in once, they should be doing it size for future capacity for the whole site. Also looking at the opportunity, which is always a problem with the city, about using some of the public lands for boreholes, for a geofield, get a lot of energy in that space. And so you've got a park, you've got this lake fill. I don't know what other engineering functions you're going to have to do if you're drilling piles anywhere. Let's take advantage of that opportunity to do all the subterranean work at once, size properly. And then, of course, with the new buildings, you want them to be all electric. 100% commitment. There's no gas running to these buildings right now. That means the restaurants are using electric cooking. These are just conditions that should be laid out. I think with the one-story building vernacular, it's really easy to take these things down to net zero. I would maybe think about just, simple design features, daylighting something that's not mentioned. I looked at the Inner Harbor rowing facility and what they did with the sawtooth roofs just to get daylight. These are one-story buildings. There's a lot more you could do. So I recognize sort of the archetypes that you're going for there, but I think there's some different styles that just might be more amenable to really strong passive design elements, and you can do that. So there's the energy piece. Related to that, salt's going to be a big issue, and I worked at Queens Quay Terminal, and I've seen like the gratuitous use of salt right on the waterfront, whether it's the bike paths. I think you want to look at a snowmelt system, and people are going to say it's crazy and it's energy intensive, but I think if you look at the net environmental impact of that versus plows and salt trucks and everything that's going on, and you're doing geo, you've got boreholes and heat recovery, I think you could come up with a really energy efficient, low carbon ice melt system that makes this a year-round waterfront destination that we do not have, where you're addressing safety issues. So I would integrate all of that. So the last environmental feature, which I think David talked about, the importance of cleanliness of the water. If you walk along portions of the lake, it gets dirty, it gets gross. There's pollution, there's garbage, and I still would love to see, what technologies are there available to start cleaning the water, and do we integrate that into the site, especially at the place where people are now touching the water. So can we do that? Now I get to switch over and my apologies to all the planners because I'm not one, but I can't not talk about it. I really like what you're doing inside the slip. I like the floating docks. I like kiosks. I like, pop-ups and having these be really informal. I'm okay with the restaurant. I think it's a really nice destination point. It pulls people down to the end and it could be a really great experience. I like the kayaks and boating. One idea for Eric, the kayak storage that was unsightly. I'd love to see a floating kayak storage, something that could be taken away in the off season. You've got the waterfront access, so maybe it's on a barge, maybe it's something that, it's really integrated as part of the water. Is that an innovation? But then to Pat's point, George, I think I have a bunch of sort of issues. I think the pool's not big enough. It's not iconic enough for the demand for what you're trying to do. I think that when we had originally looked at the slip, we said, hey, could you be swimming in the slip? Could you carve out a big portion? And having swimming in a big portion of the slip, which is where the pools are located, is different than having pools integrated in a plaza. Those are such opposing uses because the pool has to be controlled access. And so I feel like it's not big enough to be iconic. Because it needs controlled access, it is a barrier. It's going to be a barrier to capacity. It's going to be a barrier to people who don't know how to swim. There's going to be, so you're not necessarily creating as much access to water as it appears visually. I also think that because this is a waterfront piece, we're looking at it from the water's edge, and that's the money shot. Like, that's the attractive view. But we haven't thought at all about the east-west alignment. We haven't thought about Queens Quay as a street. And as many of the people who've been on the panel with me for a long time know, we still are not doing a great job building up Queens Quay as a primary street. which then tells me that I think Silo Park's going to be a problem. I think Silo Park is going to detract from the animation of Queens Quay. I think it's actually oversized as a park space, given the proximity over to Villiers Island on the footbridge and Sherburne Common. I think it's going to be shaded most of the time. So my radical solution combining all these things is I would like to see where the pools are now turned into a borderless wading pool. And I grew up in Guelph, and right in front of City Hall in Guelph, there's an amazing little splash pad wading pool. They use it for markets. In off season, they have skating there. There's one edge where you can sit and put your foot in the water. People come in, you don't have capacity issues, it's there. And then I would actually flip Block 5 in Silo Park. I would put the cultural amenity where Silo Park is located right now on Queens Quay and integrate all of your functions, your change features. You want to have sauna buildings, you want to have that stuff happening there. And I would build a beautiful feature pool where Block 5 is now, right on the water's corner, and have a really big swimming pool that really serves that function of year-round swimming. And that's, sorry, Chris, that messes up everything.
I'm taking notes.
But that, I would look, this is the one opportunity we have to look at the overall site plan. And I think we're trying to do too much. It's turning into a futon where it's not going to do anything particularly well. And I think if you want it to be water, amazing swimming pool on the water, Block 5, cultural feature on the street, integrated, and maybe you save some money because you don't have multiple buildings, you're integrating everything into one building, and then a really good open water feature at the head of the slip. So there you go. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for all that. Okay, fantastic range of comments there, and thank God this was Issues ID, because we've put a lot on the table. So I'm going to do my best to try and summarize if there's a consensus here, but I think this is what this is for, to have rich ideas and the feedback. I'm going to start with some general overview comments. That I'm going to start with the word Toronto. Toronto is an indigenous word that means trees floating in water. And I think there's symbolism there in terms of the potential of the Parliament slip. This green and blue experience of the Parliament slip I see as a continuous evolution, an aspirational evolution of slip development. If you go along, from Harbourfront, York Quay, so-and-so, they all were developed at different points in time with different features, some good, some bad, etc. This is a chance to really, bring a lot of great thinking and experience together. The third thing I want to say is the general overall commentary. I think everybody agrees that this has got to be a public mindset throughout and a marine environment mindset. It shouldn't be sort of a carbon copy of some other place and bits and pieces added. This is a unique kind of experience. And it's got to be a year-round destination. I think everybody sort of said that. So those are my starting points. I'm going to try and work my way through the various other themes. First of all, on the pool, and I appreciate Jeff's final contributions here, but wherever the pool ends up, and I think it's a very interesting idea to consider the pool, and we're in front of the silos, but notwithstanding that, wherever the pool ends up, there is unanimous support for it. No bubble. This has got to be an outdoor pool. Ideally, it should be salt water with chlorination as needed by regulations. Strong support for the inclusion of a sauna as part of the overall experience. And a great suggestion, I think it was from Pat, that, gee, wouldn't it be nice to change in the change room and swim your way out to the pool, and I believe that's what the Place Bonaventure pool does in Montreal, if I recall. So lots of great ideas for that. The only thing I would say as a proviso is every panel member has to get a complimentary bathing suit when this is open, because we all want to be there. So lots of thinking about the pool. Obviously, the potential for utilization of waste heat for the pool has got to be incorporated into this. The various suggestions on sustainability and energy that Jeff just reiterated in terms of exploring ground source heat, electric, net zero objectives, etc. Snow melting systems, all of these things are part and parcel of that sustainability package. In terms of, I'll just go to the marine activities. I think there's general support clearly for the small boat activity, whether it's kayaks, small sailboats, rental facilities, what have you. And that there's a concern about capacity is the best word that we can use here. How much can be accommodated in this slip? And when we go out on the tour this afternoon, I thought it's kind of useful if you look at the harbor front small boat rental facility. They have sailboats, they have bigger boats, they have kayaks, I believe, they have all kinds of things there. And it might be interesting to do a scale comparison of the harborfront slip and the Parliament slip. I think the harborfront slip is a lot smaller, but I'm not sure. But let's take a look when we go there. So the capacity considerations are really important, not only for the boats, but for how many people might, this will be so popular and so attractive, I think year round, but especially in the summer. We have to really think that through in terms of how many people will be accommodated there in the floating piers, et cetera. In terms of other commentary, and I'm trying to generalize because there's so many here. I think there's a couple of comments that I think are really important to think about. What's the relationship of this slip and this floating facility to Silo Park? And considering the industrial heritage of the silos and the harbor, the bookends at either end, what's that relationship going to be? What's the pedestrian connection? The last comment that Jeff made about, thinking out of the box, maybe that's the place that might be better for the pool, who knows? I also think it's important to think about the location of the restaurant versus the pool. Because everybody would love to be at a restaurant overlooking the water, obvious reasons. But the way it's placed now, the view is, if I got it right, is you're looking into the Keating Channel, which is pretty unattractive. And so perhaps, looking at different locations for the restaurant and the pool are part of this next exercise that I think would be useful to explore. Several comments about the arrival. And as George has clearly said, the geometry considerations are extensive here in terms of the north end, all the different components that are competing here, views to the water you want to maintain. That's the last thing you want to do is you come down Parliament Street or along Queens Quay and you can't see the water. That view has to be maintained all the time. So a lot of considerations and further work there. I think another commentary about the water system narrative is the best way to describe it. From the land to the wetlands to the lake, the interpretation potential, the educational potential, all those kinds of things. There's a story to be told there. And it should be told well and not a missed opportunity and not just by signage. And, people can see, feel, touch. It's the best way I can describe that. So that's another area that I think that's worthy of further consideration. And another one is the indigenous connections. I'm really looking forward to Matthew participating in the future sessions here in terms of the indigenous lens that can be applied to this slip. Because this area has been occupied and utilized by the indigenous populations for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there's stories that can be unearthed there that have to be brought to bear on this. So that's another very strong area that we're looking for. In terms of also related to the indigenous connections, just the interpretation of water, wind, land, and fire. All those elements need to be brought together. And again, I think Matthew and others and the consultants will provide that level of detail. But I think that's a very important part of the story. And I guess a final couple of areas here in terms of an overall landscape strategy would be important to understand. And there was various comments made about climate change, the need for shade. This is going to be exposed to the sunlight for certainly in the summer solstice and even in the spring and fall equinox. So I think that's something that is going to be important for people, especially given the numbers of people that will be attracted there. And you're probably going to have all ages there. You're going to have kids, you're going to have grandchildren, you're going to have grandparents. It's going to be, I just can't wait to go there. It's going to be an amazing place, unlike any other slip on the waterfront. See if I've got any other areas that I want to, a couple others. Someone made the comment about it'll be such a popular destination. There'll be other mobility facilities probably there, like bike sharing, I don't know, scooters, God knows what. But again, that adds to the capacity and the congestion potential of that slip. So a lot of considerations there. And finally, I think I just want to make a concluding comment about the importance of equity. One of the things I always love about Toronto is that, a lot of Torontonians don't have a cottage. They go to the island, and that's the cottage. And I think this is an alternative cottage, frankly, for an awful lot of Torontonians. They'll come down here, the word will spread. You've got to go to the Parliament Slip because you can swim, you can boat, you can fish, you can eat, you can drink, you can smile, all those things. And I think that's really, really a overall consideration. So there's probably a few other specific comments in here, but I hope that tried to capture most of what I heard from the panel. And needless to say, there's enthusiastic support for what we've seen so far. And hope these ideas are helpful for the consultants, and we look forward to it coming back. So I think now we give you an opportunity as a proponent to react to what you've heard this morning, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your feedback and your overwhelming support. I have to say that the comments are incredibly helpful for us. The story, the water narrative, the landscape narrative, those are certainly pieces we'd like to bring back in our next phase, as well as concerns are entirely valid. We share them, and we are excited to work on the design to try and get to understand them better. I would just like to say I would love to see all of you in this pool someday in the future. I
will if you give us a bathing suit.
I will work on the bathing suit design. Don't
All
you
right.
worry. Yeah. Yeah, they're incredibly thoughtful comments. The only thing I wanted to react maybe a little bit to Jeff's sketch, which I put in my notebook, which we will do our best. I think we have property lines and land use designations I think we have to respect, but certainly we will bring more detail about the urban edges. I think next time, views from those edges, how you arrive at the slip between Silo Park and Queens Quay will help tell the story a lot better. So thank you again.
Okay, thanks very much, Shelley. We'll look forward to it. Okay, yeah, George.
Since that bombshell appeared so late in the discussion, can I say that the more I think about this, the more interesting I think, and this goes beyond what West 8 can respond to for the reasons Shelley just mentioned, that this involves redefining the terms of reference of the work, plus reopening the deal with the Queen Quayside proponents. So everybody understands this is not simple. But, at first I was persuaded by Pat's proposition about the moving of the pool, but I think Jeff's suggestion is actually even better. And look at what it addresses. It clears up the whole issue about the openness of the views down from Parliament Street. It means the detailed pool design can be much more, functionally easygoing. The incorporation of all these architectural ancillary elements can be incorporated in the cultural facility, not easily again, I admit, although it's more not an architectural problem so much as a phasing issue. The microclimate issue for the pool is solved automatically because it's minimal shadow. You'd actually end up needing to provide shade at the pool rather than work to get hard to get sun. So, and then the last thing, this is an old argument I have with Chris. Chris always wants to put the cultural facility at the water's edge. The terrible problem with this idea is concert halls, theaters, art galleries, their primary program functions don't want glazing. They want to be black boxes. All of them, almost all cultural facilities turn up ending up being a black box. So they have lobbies and entrances which can be glazed, but those are secondary components of the programs of those buildings. I mean, Bruce Kouabar is doing the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia at the moment on a waterfront site. Well, trying to get glass in the building adjacent to the water, it's like swimming upstream in terms of functional planning of the facility because everything wants to be opaque. So I just wanted to say that radical though it is, the more I think about it, the more compelling I find. And by the way, the cultural facility would end up with a Queen's Key address. How about that? Which for drop off is actually fantastic. So anyway, end of speech.
Thank you, George. Is lunch here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could we do
Okay,
cocktails first?
I think,
Cocktails first.
Chris, unless you want to wrap up, I think this is the end of our
We need
public
to be back
session.
together.
Right?
This is clear.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of great feedback and a
In
lot for us
person.
to think about for sure.
Right.
So thank you all.
Okay, so let's formally adjourn our public session.